Hello again, my DIY loving friends, and welcome to Medicated Housewife DIY, where crafting and mental health come together. Are you ready to transform your space into a designer haven without breaking the bank? Then dive into our treasure trove of Dollar Tree DIYs that promise luxe looks for less. From chic to unique, get ready to say wow. So what are you waiting for? Let's go DIY together. For this DIY, have you ever looked at these Dollar Tree plastic Halloween chains and thought, wouldn't these make great decor if they weren't so ugly? I have. Well, we are going to attempt to change that today. I am starting with this plastic chain from Dollar Tree. I'm spraying it with Rust-Oleum paint and primer in flat white, and I will link it for you in the description box below. I did 2 to 3 coats. I let it dry overnight, and the coverage is not perfect, but there are some spots that didn't take, and that's okay. We'll see if we can incorporate the distress spots in the design. I've got this 91% alcohol, which I'll link for you below, and I pour a little bit into a cup. Then I grab my favorite alcohol ink color, which is Latte, and I'll link it for you below. I like it so much that I have next to none left. So I will be using more alcohol inks in the colors Caramel and some Teakwood for a darker effect, all of which I'll link for you below. I wear gloves for this because this ink will stain your hands, and I am using these cheap makeup brushes I got on Amazon. I'll link those for you as well. We start by wetting the brush with alcohol, drying it a little on a paper towel, and I try and squeeze as much of the latte color out as I can on the brush, but there isn't much there, as I realized. So when I tried to paint the color on the chain, it just was not working out the way I intended. I did not have enough ink. So the closest to the latte color that I have is this caramel color. I use that color on this first link, and I brush it around this time using a smaller brush. I get a nice base coat of color onto that chain. I add more and more drops of the caramel color onto the brush and then build that color onto the chain in layers, moving my brush in up and down strokes, which will eventually create a kind of a wood grain look. On this first link, I also added some of that teakwood color, but I felt like I used too much. It started to get too dark, so I actually decided that I'd go back and fix that particular link later on. So moving on to the other side to start fresh, I'm still using the caramel, and I slowly build up the color deeper and deeper by adding more drops to the brush and using the brush to move the color around, and the brush strokes start to take on a wood grain look. And I tell you guys that this alcohol ink really does the work for you. It is so easy to create great looks almost effortlessly, and any mistakes you make are easy to fix by using 91% plain alcohol to dilute and remove some color. Now, I do use a small amount of the teakwood just as an accent on that chain link to give some of the areas a darker grain, as you see here. And I also realized that those little indents in the middle of the links made the wood tone chain link look very much like bamboo. So I went with that and even emphasized those indents with some of the darker teakwood color to really play up the bamboo vibe. Moving on to the second link, it was easier to do one half of the link at a time while keeping the rest of the chain out of the way. So with each half link, I start with the caramel until I achieve that wood grain, and then I add a little teakwood to accent the wood look and emphasize the bamboo looking indentations. I let each half link dry for just a couple of minutes and then do the second half of the link the same exact way. I continue this way with the caramel first and then the teakwood to accent the wood and the bamboo looking indentations until I reached the other side of the chain where we need to fix the first link that we ended up making too dark. I already used some of the 91% alcohol to clean up the link a little bit, as you can see right here. And then I start over using mostly caramel, and then with just an accent of the teakwood ink so it would not get much darker. And here's just a reminder of what we started with, this Dollar Tree plastic chain. And now look at this lovely wood tone and bamboo looking piece of chain decor. Honestly, I am floored by how great this came out. I didn't expect to like it this much, but I suggest come Halloween next year, you stock up on those ugly plastic chains. I know I will, because look what we can do with them. This one's a winner. This next DIY is definitely TikTok trendy. I'm using this plaster of Paris, very inexpensive. I'll link it for you below. I don't have much experience with it, but it's not real difficult to work with. I grabbed this plastic container and I scooped some plaster into it, Didn't measure it, I just eyeballed it. Then I added some water. Again, didn't measure. I just began stirring with this plastic spoon. I know it looks like metal, but it's just metallic plastic. I add more water until it reaches a pancake batter consistency. I picked 3 paint colors to add. First, this apple barrel black. I add a couple of drops to the surface of the plaster, and I'll link that for you below. Then this apple barrel country gray, which I will also link. I add a couple of drops of that as well. And then this Deco Art Shimmering Silver Metallic, adding some drops of that too. I'll link all the paint colors used for you below. I grabbed a bamboo skewer and gently moved the paint drops around to intertwine with each other. You don't want to mix these together, just kind of intermingle them, as you see me doing right here. I got this set of 2 silicone trinket trays, which I will link for you below, and I pour the plaster with those streaks of paint right into the mold. And this is the point where I kind of wish I measured, but it worked out fine, and I had just enough plaster to fit the whole mold, so I take that as a good sign. I move it around to make sure the plaster goes into all the little nooks and crannies, and tapped the sides of the mold a little to try and remove bubbles. I probably should have paid more attention to getting rid of bubbles, but it's my first attempt, and so far so good. Then I put that aside to dry overnight. I tried to reuse that plastic container, probably a mistake. This time I added the water before adding the plaster. I don't know if that made a difference or not, but once I got the pancake batter consistency, I grabbed 3 different color paint. First Deco Art Warm Beige, then some Folk Art Cafe, and finally some Deco Art Metallic and Emperor's Gold. I'll link them below. I add a couple of drops of each, same as before. And here's where I realized, for whatever reason, that plaster just hardened on me. I don't know why. I didn't walk away for too long or anything. It's plaster, it's temperamental. Oh well, we move on. Long story short, I grabbed a fresh container and mixed some new plaster up and added those same colors. And this time I was able to use the skewer to move the colors around with no problem. I pour the colored plaster into a second trinket tray mold and shake it around to get the plaster all in there, and I definitely didn't tap the mold enough because there were bubbles, but again, it's a learning experience. And then I put that mold aside to dry overnight as well. And the next morning, the plaster came out of the molds very easily. This first black and white marble one only had some small bubbles on the edge, but overall I was happy with it. And the warmer golden beige tray also came out easy, but it did have more bubbles around the edges than the first. But all in all, I was very happy with these trinket trays. Using the plaster is really easy and honestly kind of fun. And I think that that black and white marble looking one is truly upscale. I was very pleased with my first foray into plaster trinket trays, and I highly recommend you give them a try too. Last week, you guys loved my Anthropologie dupe of a leopard tray so much that I decided to do another. My inspiration was this beautiful cherry tray at Anthropologie for $133. Well, that's not going to work for us. I've got this large wood tray that came in a 3-pack from Hobby Lobby I got on sale last year. Honestly, it was like $8 for the 3-pack, I think, but I'm finally going to use it today. I started with this apple barrel white paint. I paint just the inner tray walls and the frame around it, and also the outside wall. So basically everything but the middle of the tray would have been a much easier way of saying that. While my paint dries, I did find this illustration of some cherries on Google Images that I sized to my tray on Canva. I'm using a piece of freezer paper like from the supermarket and a piece of white tissue paper from Dollar Tree, cut them both to the size of a sheet of printer paper, and then I iron the shiny side of the freezer paper to the tissue paper, concentrating the iron on the edges of the paper, not the middle. And meanwhile, I fell in love with this illustration of a pear, and I scrapped the whole cherry thing, and I print that pear onto the tissue paper side of my ironed freezer paper tissue combo with my regular printer. And now I have to carefully peel the tissue paper off of the freezer paper, which is why we only iron the edges, so that that tissue is easier to peel with the design intact. So now I have a lovely pear printed onto tissue paper, and I'm going to decoupage it onto a color. So to make the colors in the pear really pop, I am going to paint the back of the design with some white paint. We are not painting the printed side. This is the back side of the printed tissue. I cover the whole design with the white paint, and I wait for it to totally dry. Meanwhile, at first, I thought I wanted the background for the pear to be pink. So first I mixed some Apple Barrel Cameo Pink with some Apple Barrel Pink Parfait, and I painted the inside of the tray with the pink paint mixture, and then I let that totally dry. Once my pear is dry, I carefully cut the design out of the tissue paper, trying to get as much of the background cut off as possible without cutting my design. And I need some new small cutting scissors, paper cutting scissors. If anyone has suggestions, please leave me a comment with a nice sharp scissors recommendation in the comments below. Thank you. Okay, so I hated the pink tray. I painted over the pink with white, and I decided to use this apple barrel beige, which I will link for you below. So we paint the flat inside and the inside walls of the tray with the beige paint, and then we allow that to dry. I decided to paint the outside of the tray and that top frame with some green. I mixed some apple barrel caterpillar and I muted it a bit with some Deco Art Hauser light green because the caterpillar was very bright. And I'll link those for you below. I used the mixture to paint the top and the outside frame of the tray, and then I let that dry. And I still wasn't thrilled with the beige, so I grabbed some white paint and light distress painted the beige with the white. First going all in one direction and then in the opposite direction to create a very subtle crosshatch distressed look. I figured out where I wanted to place the tissue paper pear, and then using some glossy Mod Podge, I glued the pear down to the tray in small sections, using a small amount of glue to try and minimize my wrinkles until the whole pear was decoupaged onto the tray. Then I use more Mod Podge to go over all the edges of the design to make sure it's not going to lift up anywhere. After a couple more minutes, I then Mod Podge over the entire design, doing my best not to let the paintbrush rip the tissue anywhere. Once my Mod Podge was completely dry, I really wanted my tray to be super glossy, so I used this Deco Art Triple Thick, which I will link for you below, and if you guys have a suggestion for me for a super glossy sealer that is less thick and less hard to use than this Triple Thick, and maybe even self-levels a little but is not resin, if such a sealer exists, let me know in the comments. I would love to find a product like that. And this is my Pear Tray, and although I still don't love the beige background and the pink underneath is peeking through, I love the pear illustration so much, and the fresh feel of the green frame around the pear just all in all is like a breath of fresh air for me. It had some challenges, but in the end, I love it. And you know the drill. I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments which one of these designer decor for less Dollar Tree DIYs that wow was your favorite and why. You know I love hearing from all of you. And if you've enjoyed this DIY video, there's even more waiting for you. Just click that link on your screen for more Medicated Housewife DIYs. Also, I'd love for you to join our little crafting family and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and until next time, my name is Sarah. I'm the Medicated Housewife, and crafting is my medication.